And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day.
Let there be light. I'm going to address these 3 verses literally, as I'm expected to, but I would first ask you to look at them symbolically. You'll remember from the first 2 verses of the Bible that the start of Genesis is an explanation of how order came from chaos. If I simply add parentheses, then the first 3 verses provide a statement of creation followed by an explanation of the initial state of the earth. I talked about chaos and its connection to the deep or abyss. I think we all understand the connection between light and dark and good and bad and order and chaos. And so we have the deep or dark abyss, i.e. chaos, a divine breath of wind, and God brings light where there was darkness, or order from the chaos. So let us get literal. God said. Much is made of the word of God in the Bible. Christ as the Logos, or word, is a common concept. It's of course incorrect, as Logos has been incorrectly translated, but that's probably a video in itself. Anyway, in Genesis we are told how God speaks everything into existence. Now, how did he do that? Does God have lungs, an airway, or larynx? Speech requires many things, which apparently God does not possess. Unless man was literally created in his image, we must assume that God does not possess the anatomical structures required to form speech, or organs with which to hear himself, because we understand that the ability to understand what one is saying is a requirement of speech. But as importantly, speech requires a medium. You see, speech is quite simply a modulation of sound waves produced by the aforementioned anatomical structures. Speech as we understand it, and the Bible was written for us to understand, requires that we breathe air of the right constituency and pressure. So how could God produce normal speech in this early chaotic universe, when the earth was as yet unformed, and the waters had not been separated from the waters? And why does he speak at all, unless he had someone to speak to? I'm not sat typing up these notes, vocalizing every thought as I go. I did not just say out loud, "I feel thirsty, I will make myself a cup of tea." We do not normally produce a running commentary of our actions for our own listening pleasure. It is normally only when we require to communicate our thoughts to another creature capable of hearing our voice and responding to it that we vocalize. Now, we do have a word for people who continually talk to themselves, but it's not God. Let there be light. What is light? In common parlance, light is that part of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum to which the human eye is sensitive. I've seen apologists talk about the light in Genesis meaning the entire electromagnetic spectrum. But again, this Bible was supposedly written for all people for all time. Ideas about the electromagnetic spectrum did not start to develop until the 19th century. So in a Bible written to be understood by a pre-Greco-Roman civilization, light most certainly means one thing only when used in this context: visible light. To take this as far as I think I need to, you will all, I hope, know that everything gives off electromagnetic radiation. Any matter which is not at absolute zero is radiating electromagnetic energy. No one at the time of the writing of the Bible had a clue about this, of course. But equally, anyone claiming that light referred to anything other than visible light needs to explain why this tautology was included in the creation account, because the simple fact of God creating anything implies that he was creating electromagnetic radiation. You can see the problem when trying to address the Bible either literally or scientifically. It's nonsense either way, and one can quickly descend to absurd levels in explaining it. Anyway, 2 questions immediately leap to my mind. Question 1, why did God create light? He obviously had no need for it. He happily created heaven and earth, and his breath glided over the waters in the dark, according to Genesis 1:1 and 1:2. There was no one else around to see the light, apparently, and he'll be creating the lights of the sun and moon in a couple of days for people to see by. Taking the Bible literally, there is absolutely no purpose served by the creation of this light. Question 2. How did God create light? As stated above, light is simply a small part of the electromagnetic radiation spectrum. It is radiation. It does not exist on its own. It must be radiated by something. It must have a source. And for visible light, this source needs to be very hot. And God has created no sources yet. If, for instance, God had, let's say, created a few basic chemical elements, compacted them together under immense pressure to the point where their nuclei underwent fusion, then he would have produced an abundant supply of light. But he hadn't. Not yet. If the Bible had been written by people ignorant of basic physics, trying to explain the world around them, then this quaint idea of light existing in and of itself is completely understandable. But this is not what the Bible is meant to be. Another not so very small point. Radiation of any kind is destructive, even visible light. Don't believe me? Go stare at the sun for 5 minutes. Or don't. I'm not going to get into quantum physics here because it gives me brain freeze. But if you've ever seen faded paper, fabrics, photographs, or the like, then you've seen the destructive action of light radiation. And visible light will cause mutations in DNA. If God created light, then he created a destructive force, and one that was destructive to human DNA on day one of his creation. Before he had even formed the earth, he had created death, and all for no apparent purpose whatsoever. Creationists will jump through self-created hoops here and start explaining that God's firmament protected his early creation from harmful radiation. This is absurd on every point, but just a couple of the absurdities. The very rocks the earth is made of produce harmful radiation. See radon gas, for example. And no amount of God's firmament is going to protect you from that. Not exactly a perfect creation, is it? God saw the light. That would require him to have organs sensitive to that small part of the electromagnetic spectrum which us humans have, of course. He saw the light was good, ignoring the fact that its radiation was destructive and would instantly begin to cause mutations to the pathetically weak creatures he was about to create. He divided the light from the darkness. Now there is a trick. Think about that for a moment. Shine a light into the darkness and what do you get? What you get is not darkness. What you most certainly do not get is a mixture of light and darkness. There's no such animal. There is nothing to separate. God called the light day and the darkness he called night. Now why do you think he did that? We all know, of course, that it is light during the day and dark during the night, and that is due to the earth rotating as it orbits the sun. Unless you live above the Arctic Circle, of course, or below the Antarctic Circle, or there is a full solar eclipse, or a bright full moon in a clear sky. Yet apparently God created day and night with his sourceless light, perhaps switching it on and off at will, for no particular reason. Because he apparently did this in a universe which comprises nothing but a formless earth, whatever that means, and the heavens, or whatever they were. No sun, no moon, no stars. But at the end of day one, God wanted a night to occur, for some reason, or perhaps the people writing the Bible did. And so they invented this fantasy because the sun, which is a requirement for the day-night cycle, was still 3 days away from being mentioned. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Why does God need the face of the earth to be bathed alternately in light and dark in the time leading up to the creation of the sun? I mean, if he did need it, why not simply create the sun first? Doesn't sound like intelligent design, does it? And what interest does God have in creating night and day on day one? In a couple of days the Earth-Sun system will be in place and night and day will occur as they do now. Is this perhaps an attempt by the scientific illiterate to shoehorn the definition of a day into the creation myth early on? Let's have another look at this symbolically rather than literally. If we ignore verse 5, then verses 2, 3 and 4 are simply God subduing evil and or creating good from or within the chaotic state of the abyss. God creates good and divides the good from the evil. As a symbology within a myth, it makes sense. It makes sense that scientifically illiterate men would concoct such a story, and it makes sense that superstitious, scientifically ignorant people would accept it. Here at the end of 2012, we no longer have the excuse of scientific illiteracy. Anyone capable of following this video is capable of understanding enough to know that light does not and cannot exist in and of itself, that the concept of day and night without a sun in place is absurd, and that Genesis 3, 4 and 5 are not to be taken literally. Which leads us to question why anyone with even average intelligence would insist that we do take this myth literally. Their motive is obviously not based on any search for truth or understanding. I wonder what their motive really is.